Welcome to Entertainment Insider. Today, we look past the sensational headlines to examine the documented reality of Hayden Panettiere's life, career, and legal battles. Welcome to Entertainment Insider. I'm Jane, and today we're investigating the documented reality behind the career, legal battles, and life of Hayden Panettiere.
Thank you for having me, Jane. When people look at Hayden Panettiere, the public conversation has often been reduced to standard tabloid tropes about former child stars falling from grace. What gets lost in that sensationalism is that her story isn't about personal weakness or reckless Hollywood partying. It is a documented case study in systemic labor exploitation where adult management systems treated a minor as a commercial asset rather than a human being.
That distinction between personal failure and industrial exploitation is fundamental. Where does the primary source evidence show that pattern actually beginning?
It began when she was barely 15 years old, during her breakout global fame on the hit television series Heroes. In her landmark 2022 first-person disclosures, Hayden revealed that adult members of her management team began routinely giving her what they called happy pills before red carpets. These were pharmaceutical stimulants, essentially Adderall derivatives, administered specifically to keep a teenage girl perky, energetic, and compliant for grueling press tours. This was not adolescent rebellion. It was adult handlers chemically managing a minor's neurochemistry to optimize corporate productivity and protect broadcast schedules.
When you frame it as pediatric chemical management by adults responsible for her welfare, it reframes her entire relationship with substance reliance as an occupational injury.
Precisely. In any other industry, giving stimulants to a 15-year-old worker to sustain 16-hour promotional tours would trigger immediate federal labor sanctions. In Hollywood during the mid-2000s, it was normalized behind closed doors as routine talent management. What happens neurologically when you flood a developing adolescent brain with stimulants is a predictable, devastating physiological crash. To come down from the artificial highs required for media appearances, downers and alcohol were introduced, locking her into a vicious chemical cycle before her brain was fully formed.
Let's look at the financial mechanics behind that pressure. She wasn't simply an actress on a call sheet. She was the primary financial engine for an entire enterprise.
She was a professional breadwinner from early childhood, having worked continuously since she was 11 months old in commercials and soap operas. By the time Heroes became an international hit, millions of dollars in advertising and hundreds of production jobs depended directly on her ability to show up, smile, and perform. When a child shoulders that magnitude of economic responsibility for their family and management team, the concept of saying, "I am exhausted," or "I need help," is completely off the table. The surrounding adults have an immediate financial incentive to keep the performer working at all costs, regardless of the compounding psychological toll.
And as that show concluded, she transitioned into adulthood and took on the starring role of Juliette Barnes on ABC's Nashville. What happened behind the scenes during that production?
This brings us to what I consider the most harrowing and weekly examined chapter of her entire career. Around 2014, Hayden gave birth to her daughter Kaya and developed severe, debilitating postpartum depression, which began intersecting with her alcohol dependence. Instead of providing medical leave or comprehensive mental health support, the Nashville production and writers' room began actively monitoring her private off-camera crises. They took her actual real-life medical charts, her emotional unraveling, and her postpartum struggles and scripted them directly into Juliette Barnes' storylines week after week.
To be completely clear, the production writers were taking her real-time psychiatric emergencies and writing them into broadcast television scripts for her to act out?
Yes, Hayden confirmed this explicitly in her 2022 on-the-record interviews. She was forced to report to the studio for 14 to 16-hour shoot days and reenact her own postpartum depression, substance reliance, and emotional despair under hot studio lights. The boundary between Juliette Barnes and Hayden Panettiere was intentionally erased by the showrunners to capture raw, authentic television drama for ratings. Imagine suffering from acute clinical depression and being contractually mandated to perform that exact trauma in front of dozens of crew members, day after day, with zero emotional buffer.
That kind of psychological feedback loop must have made genuine recovery virtually impossible while under contract.
It created an inescapable echo chamber where her nervous system could no longer distinguish between her personal reality and scripted breakdown. When she tried to self-medicate the unbearable anxiety and exhaustion of those shoot days, her physical health began deteriorating at a terrifying speed. By her late 20s, her alcohol reliance had progressed to acute physiological crisis, including jaundice and severe liver impairment. Doctors warned her plainly that her liver was failing and that if she did not stop drinking immediately, her organs would give out before she reached her 30s.
And while she was facing life-threatening medical consequences, the television industry was celebrating Juliet Barnes as award-worthy, visceral drama.
That is the grotesque paradox of the entertainment industry. Critics and network executives lavished praise on her performance, calling it fearless, raw, and gut-wrenching. In reality, they were witnessing an unassisted human being slowly disintegrating in plain sight for corporate profit. There was no institutional duty of care, no independent on-set psychologist, and no mandatory hiatus offered to protect her physical integrity. She was celebrated because she was bleeding in real time.
Let's turn to the narrative surrounding her daughter, Kaya. For years, tabloid headlines claimed Hayden gave up custody to Vladimir Klitschko. What does the documented legal record show?
The mainstream tabloid narrative surrounding Kaya's custody was fundamentally distorted, deeply misogynistic, and profoundly cruel. In her 2022 Red Table Talk disclosure, Hayden clarified the precise legal and operational reality of that 2018 arrangement. She never voluntarily surrendered her parental rights or decided to walk away from raising her child. Kaya was initially sent to Ukraine on what was framed as a temporary visit, while Hayden entered inpatient trauma and substance rehabilitation in the United States.
So how did what was presented as a temporary arrangement during medical treatment turn into a permanent custody transfer across international borders?
Once Hayden was in a vulnerable, isolated recovery state, she was presented with legal paperwork transferring primary custody to Klitschko in Ukraine. We must understand the immense geopolitical and structural power imbalance at play in that situation. Vladimir Klitschko is not just a former world heavyweight boxing champion. His brother Vitaly is the mayor of Kyiv, representing one of the most politically powerful families in Ukraine. For an American woman navigating early recovery, challenging child custody in Ukrainian courts under foreign legal jurisdiction was a structural impossibility.
It was essentially an international legal trap where contesting it in a foreign court system was completely out of reach.
Exactly. Under Ukrainian family law and international jurisdictional statutes, once the child was established overseas, Hayden had virtually zero legal leverage. Yet American tabloids ran sensational headlines painting her as an absentee mother who abandoned her toddler to party in Los Angeles. Hayden spoke candidly about the agony of knowing that seeking medical treatment, the very thing she needed to save her life, was weaponized against her parental custody. It created a devastating public stigma that haunted her for years, even as she maintained regular contact and a loving bond with her daughter.
During that same period of vulnerability, she also became trapped in an abusive relationship with Brian Hickerson. How did that compound her isolation?
When an individual is dealing with severe trauma, chemical dependency, and the grief of separation from their child, their psychological defense mechanisms are compromised. Hickerson subjected her to repeated domestic violence, which resulted in multiple felony arrests and legal protective orders. What is critical to understand from a psychological perspective is trauma bonding. Abusers target vulnerable people who feel they have lost everything. Even when she gathered the immense courage to testify against him and help secure a prison sentence, the public discourse often victim-blamed her for staying as long as she did.
She actually stood up in court, cooperated with law enforcement, and spoke publicly to help other domestic abuse survivors understand the cycle of violence.
She showed extraordinary bravery. She spoke at events, worked with survivor organizations, and used her platform to destigmatize domestic abuse. She didn't hide behind a public relations wall. She spoke plainly about how shame, fear, and low self-worth keep women trapped in dangerous cycles. She entered intensive trauma therapy, completed 8 months of inpatient rehabilitation, and underwent rigorous somatic healing to address the core root of her trauma. By 2022 and 2023, she had done the grueling, unglamorous internal work required to rebuild her nervous system and reclaim her voice.
Just as she was establishing stability and making her acting comeback in Scream 6, tragedy struck her family with the sudden loss of her younger brother, Jansen, in 2023.
The loss of Hayden Panettiere in February 2023 was a devastating, catastrophic blow to Hayden. Jansen was only 28 years old when he passed away from an undiagnosed heart condition, cardiomegaly coupled with aortic valve complications. He wasn't just her brother. He was an artist, her closest confidant, and the only other person in the world who truly understood what it was like to grow up inside that family dynamic. They shared the unique, unspoken burden of being young performers navigating the pressures of the entertainment industry together.
In her subsequent interviews, you could see how deeply she carried that grief, yet she continued to honor his artistic legacy and talk about him with profound love.
She spoke about him with immense vulnerability, celebrating his vibrant art and his gentle spirit. Grief of that magnitude alters a person's entire biological and emotional baseline. It is not something you get over in a matter of months. Yet despite carrying that crushing sorrow, Hayden remained committed to her creative projects, including producing and starring in new independent films. She was actively fighting every single day to build a meaningful, autonomous adult life on her own terms.
That brings us to September 2024, when a video interview with People magazine went viral and sparked an intense wave of online speculation. What really happened there?
In September 2024, People magazine published a promotional video interview for her film Amber Alert, where Hayden appeared visibly exhausted and spoke slowly. Within hours, the internet erupted with predatory armchair diagnosis, TikTok body language experts, and speculative commentary declaring that she had relapsed. What competitors and gossip channels omitted was Hayden's direct, dignified response on social media addressing the cruelty of that digital circus. She revealed that she had been awake for over 48 hours straight managing a critical, life-threatening health emergency with her beloved dog before arriving on set.
It is infuriating that when a survivor of trauma shows physical exhaustion or grief, algorithmic media immediately commodifies it as a relapse scandal.
It exposes the parasitic nature of the modern digital creator economy. Online commentators and clickbait outlets have a massive financial incentive to generate panic and controversy because relapse narratives generate millions of views. They demand that former child stars be completely open about their trauma, but the second that person appears tired, grieving, or human, they weaponize it for engagement. Hayden called out that toxicity directly, reminding the public that true empathy means allowing people the grace to have difficult days without reducing them to a spectacle.
Let's drill down into the contractual protections. How did the lack of union oversight in the mid-2000s enable management teams to administer stimulants without accountability?
During the 2000s, SAG-AFTRA rules regarding minor performers primarily focused on on-set schooling hours and physical safety in stunt work. There was a massive regulatory loophole regarding promotional tours, press junkets, and third-party management practices away from the soundstage. Management teams operated in an unregulated gray zone where they could demand 18-hour promotional schedules across international time zones without oversight. Because the managers took a percentage of gross earnings, their financial incentive was aligned purely with maximum exposure, completely detached from the minor's biological health.
And that regulatory failure directly enabled handlers to treat a minor's physical exhaustion as an obstacle to be chemically managed rather than a biological limit.
Exactly. When a teenager is exhausted from filming all week and flying to international press tours all weekend, the ethical solution is rest. Instead, the commercial solution chosen by her team was to hand her stimulants to artificially maintain high energy on camera. This created a catastrophic precedent where she was taught from age 15 that her body's natural signals of fatigue and distress were irrelevant. Her worth was tied entirely to her ability to produce and perform, establishing a destructive psychological pattern that took decades of intensive therapy to untangle.
Let's look at the Nashville era again. Were there any existing industry standards or SAG protections that should have prevented the writer's room from exploiting her medical condition?
Historically, writers' rooms have drawn inspiration from actors' lives, but what occurred on Nashville crossed a severe ethical boundary. When an actor discloses a clinical diagnosis, such as severe postpartum depression or substance reliance to their employer, that information is protected medical privacy. Using confidential health disclosures to shape public broadcast storylines without explicit, informed consent borders on workplace harassment and severe psychological negligence. It created a hostile work environment where Hayden could not seek help without seeing her deepest vulnerabilities weaponized into next week's script.
That turns the concept of artistic expression into an extractive workplace hazard where the worker is punished for being vulnerable.
That is the core takeaway. In any other professional environment, forcing an employee suffering from acute clinical depression to reenact that depression on camera daily would be grounds for immediate litigation. In entertainment, it was marketed as method acting and groundbreaking television. The industry must establish rigid legal boundaries prohibiting productions from using cast members' confidential medical and psychiatric histories as source material for scripts. Actors must have the absolute right to a safe workplace where their personal health cannot be mined for corporate ad revenue.
And what about the legal mechanisms surrounding international custody? What reforms are needed to protect American parents facing cross-border jurisdictional battles during medical recovery?
International family law under the Hague Convention is notoriously complex and heavily favors the country of habitual residence. When a parent enters medical treatment, temporary care agreements must include ironclad jurisdictional safeguards preventing the other parent from establishing permanent foreign residency. Without specialized international legal counsel, vulnerable parents in recovery can inadvertently forfeit their parental rights simply by agreeing to what they believe is temporary care. Hayden's experience highlights the urgent need for legal advocacy organizations to support parents navigating cross-border custody against powerful foreign political dynasties.
Her willingness to speak so candidly on Red Table Talk broke through decades of tabloid misinformation and gave voice to so many mothers who have faced similar legal isolation.
It was a watershed moment in celebrity discourse because it shattered the monolithic bad mother trope that tabloids have weaponized against women for generations. By walking viewers step by step through the legal timeline, she demonstrated how systemic power imbalances dictate custody outcomes far more than parental love. She proved that acknowledging your need for mental health treatment should be seen as an act of maternal responsibility, not grounds for punitive separation. Her vulnerability helped dismantle the profound shame that so many mothers carry when dealing with severe postpartum depression and custody heartbreak.
Looking at the digital media landscape today, how can independent creators and media consumers reject the predatory cycles that targeted Hayden after the 2024 interview?
We have to recognize our own complicity in the attention economy. Every time an audience clicks on a video analyzing a celebrity's slight speech hesitation or physical exhaustion, algorithms reward creators for generating speculative cruelty. Independent media creators have an ethical duty to verify primary sources, respect medical boundaries, and reject unverified clickbait theories. We must shift our pop culture coverage from voyeuristic exploitation towards structural accountability, focusing on the systems that shape the industry rather than tearing down individual performers.
When we look at the complete trajectory, the pediatric stimulant doping, the Nashville writer's room, the Ukrainian custody trap, and digital exploitation, what is the overarching lesson?
The fundamental lesson is that Hollywood needs a complete structural overhaul in how it protects talent, particularly young performers. We need mandatory independent psychological advocates on production sets who have the legal authority to shut down filming when an actor's mental health is compromised. We need strict contractual firewalls that make it illegal for writers' rooms to exploit real-time medical and personal crises of their cast members for entertainment. And we need a cultural shift from consumers to recognize that performers are human beings with workplace rights, not consumable commodities for our amusement.
Hayden Panettiere fought with immense dignity against a system that failed her at every single turn. Her willingness to speak the truth on the record is her greatest legacy.
She refused to let Hollywood sanitize her story or turn her into a quiet victim. By speaking on the record about pediatric doping, custody realities, and domestic abuse, she provided a roadmap for future generations of artists to demand accountability. Her legacy is defined not by the institutions that extracted from her, but by the extraordinary courage and humanity she demonstrated throughout her life. She showed us that healing is not linear, but telling the truth is an act of undeniable power.
Her courage in speaking out has undeniably ignited an overdue conversation across the industry.
It truly has, Jane. Her disclosures forced SAG-AFTRA, production studios, and talent agencies to re-examine their ethical responsibilities toward minor performers. When an artist lays bare their deepest wounds not for sensationalism, but to protect the next generation of child actors, that is true heroism. The greatest tribute we can pay to Hayden Panettiere is to ensure that no 15-year-old on a television set is ever subjected to chemical management or creative exploitation again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vance, for breaking down this vital, systemic perspective with such clarity and care. For our viewers at home, please remember to like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Entertainment Insider for more in-depth investigative coverage.